The Dauthi tribe is a fascinating and tragic part of Magic the Gathering history, and I was genuinely surprised to see that after more than 20 years, a brand new Dauthi has joined the ranks.
Magic.
I am a wizard!
History.
I'm an old wizard!
The Magic Historian.
My bones hurt. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, we are here today to talk about the history of the Dauthi. These are a dark and tragic folk, and in all honesty, I genuinely never expected to see a new Dauthi card appear in Magic, specifically because of the shadow ability, right? This is something that was originally concepted back in the 90s, and the idea behind what happened with the Dauthi is pretty dark. Essentially, they got trapped in between realms, and as a result, the entirety of their race went stark raving mad. And also, as an interesting side note, the Dauthi card that we've got from Modern Horizons 2 here is the only rare Dauthi that has ever been created. So let's take a look at the spoiler, and then we will take a nice walk through the history of all of the different Dauthi that exist, because there's less than a dozen Dauthi cards altogether. So Dothi Voidwalker is 2 black for a 3/2 Dauthi Rogue. And what's cool is the Dauthi now have their own creature type. For the longest time in Magic's history, that wasn't the case. So I do like that they went back and updated the different races to be in line with what's going on, right? The same thing they did with Phyrexians. So the new germ tokens that are made by Cauldron Complete, for example, are actually Phyrexian germ tokens. I like that. That little extra level of flavor is cool to me, and being able to play with like tribes that are a little more out there is funky as well. So Dothi Voidwalker, like I said, 2 black for a 3/2. It has Shadow. Now, Shadow is a very weird ability. It says this creature can block or be blocked by only creatures with Shadow. So it's kind of inhabiting the same mechanical space as the flying ability, but in a more restricted capability. Imagine flying creatures could only block other flying creatures, and then you'd have the exact same thing as Shadow. So it is a pseudo sort of evasion combined with can't block. In most cases, you're not going to be playing against other shadow creatures. So really what shadow equals is this creature can't be blocked and this creature can't block. But with the additional flavor that somehow, if your opponent does have shadow creatures, then they can interact with them. And there were actually 3 different races that resided in the shadows, and we will actually go more into that in a lore video covering the concept of what happened to them. But ultimately, the idea is that the Dauthi were trapped between Dominaria and Wrath in the shadowy realm, and it's not this separate sort of scenario. They can actually see Dominaria, they just can't interact with it. And that's what drove them to madness. The reason that the Dauthi are so insane is because they're originally from Dominaria. They were shunted into the shadow realm, and they're unable to escape it. And so they became twisted and evil. Actually, there's only one of the 3 races that got pulled into the shadows that were able to maintain their sanity, and that's the Saltari. Those are the white aligned shadow creatures. So Dothi Voidwalker, on top of having Shadow, has the ability, if a card will be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. Tap, sacrifice Dothi Voidwalker, choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So this is a very interesting concept for the Dauthi, right? Like, they exist in this shadow realm, but somehow this particular Dauthi rogue has figured out a way to tap into void energy. So when things are basically used up on the prime material plane of Dominaria, or whatever plane of existence you summon the Dauthi to, it's able to somehow draw these things out into the void. And then it can sacrifice its own essence to reach into that void and channel the magic that exists therein. That has to be an ability that was developed over time. I actually really like the fact that it's been so long since we've seen the Dothi, and now we get this new Dothi who's developed an ability we've never seen with the Dothi. That's a really cool concept, and I really enjoy the way the artwork illustrates the concept of the Dauthi Voidwalker. If you're not really paying attention, you may not realize how, like, non-substantial, incorporeal, I'm having a hard time with the word here right now, how ephemeral in nature these Dauthi actually are, right? You can see that the branches of the tree are actually projecting through his head and through his hand that's wielding that blade. And also you can see the moon directly through the back of his head and his cloak and everything. And if you look at where his arm is, it looks like his arm is inside the tree almost, with the shadow extending above it. It's like, or he went to rest his arm on it, but it's just passing through the tree. It definitely gives him a very unsubstantial, sort of vapory, misty kind of feel to him, which is exactly what the Dauthi should have. I found the concept of the Dauthi to be absolutely amazing. So like I said, we're actually going to wander through the history of all the Dauthi cards. Let us move on. Here's a perfect example of the sort of twisted mindset that you end up as a result of being trapped in between worlds like this. So we have Dothi Cutthroat. 1 black and 1. It's a shadow creature, obviously. Pay 1 black and 1, tap it. Destroy target creature with shadow. Pretty crazy, right? Can destroy anybody with shadow. It doesn't matter which of the 3 tribes they belong to, right? This Cutthroat is ready to take them out. And the flavor text explains it. In their twisted logic, to empty the shadow world is to escape it. You're trapped in this shadowy realm where you can see the world where you once lived. And no matter how much time goes by, nothing you do allows you to pierce that veil and return to your home. So slowly your mind twists, but thoughts of escape, like, they still remain. Your brain is still screaming at you to flee the shadow realm, but you can't. And so the only way that you can think of to free yourself from the shadow realm is to empty it. Everybody must be gone. Even themselves. If you notice, the Dauthi Cutthroat can use its ability on itself. And this definitely screams the concept of madness. And the artwork as well. You can see the Cutthroat perched up on a rooftop, looking down through a little, like, moon window where smoke is flowing upwards, and the warmth. You've got, like, the cool dark night. You've got him hunched over with this vicious grin on his face, and he's right above, presumably somebody just cooking a nice meal, whatever it is that they're doing, living their life. He's going to pop down through that ceiling hole and end them, right? The idea of getting dragged into the shadow world is really, really intense. And it happened to all these people at once. But the Dauthi also figured out how to bring others from the main reality into their shadow realm. And you can see it's a horrific way that they do so. So you have the Dauthi Trapper as one example of that. And that's 1 black and 2 for a 1/1. It has the ability tap, target creature gains shadow until end of turn. And it's interesting because when you look at it, you're like, wow, if I give a creature shadow until end of turn, it's mostly going to be unblockable. What a really neat ability. But what a horrific thing to have to endure. The Dauthi, like, basically wraps his body around another being, imprisons them, and subsumes them, dragging them into the shadow realm, dude. This would definitely warp your sanity. And the flavor text adds an amazing another dimension to it. The flavor text says, Merfolk tell their young of Dan, humans of Ragman, Doll tell tales of the Dauthi, and they are far worse. That's pretty amazing. I mean, the Dan's a gigantic fish that'll eat you, and the Ragman is a distended human with crazy claw-like hands that lives in the alleys and it's just like might steal your children, that kind of a setup. But the Dauthi Trapper will envelop you in his shadowy, insubstantial body and drag you into another reality, right? That is next level insanity. And there's another card that shows the process of being dragged into the Dauthi, basically, like, side of existence. And that's Dauthi Embrace. 1 black and 2 for an enchantment. 2 black, target creature gains shadow until end of turn. So really, honestly, this enchantment functions like target creature becomes unblockable until end of turn, which feels weird for a black card, but the flavor text and the concept behind this card. Look at the flavor text. It says, the Dauthi army grows by screams and bounds. And that quote is attributed to Lena, the Soltari emissary. And the Soltari are the white-aligned individuals that also exist in the Shadow Realm. Originally, the Soltari and the Dauthi were enemies before they even got drawn into the Shadow Realm. So they're both trapped with their mortal enemy tribes in the Shadow Realm, the Thalicos being the third, and those were neutral parties in between that weren't really involved in anything, but had the bad luck to get drawn into the Shadow Realm as well. So the flavor text on this card ties in fantastically with the artwork. You can see this crazy insectile bog monster that is literally like driving its claws into the ground, trying to stop the inexorable pull of the crazy shadowy tendrils that have whipped out of nowhere and are dragging it away. This is a really evocative way to show just how horrific the idea of being subsumed by the Dauthi is. I really dig it. Now, let us move on to some more Dauthi goodness. That is the Dauthi Ghoul. So, this is an interesting play on ghoul concepts. Ghouls feed upon the dead, right? So, Dauthi Ghoul is 1 black and 1. It's a 1/1 shadow. Whenever any creature with shadow is put into a graveyard from play, put a +1/+1 counter on Dauthi Ghoul. So this, I mean, if it was still alive, you'd call it a cannibal. But this is a zombie that can only feed on the shadowy beings that are in the Shadow Realm. But I'm sure because of the overlay and the fact that it can see the normal reality of Dominaria, it probably witnesses regular beings losing their lives all the time and just wails and gnashes its teeth and just screams to the heavens about trying to claw at the body, but its claws are just going right through it because it's stuck in the Shadow Realm, and it just becomes crazier and crazier and becomes a bigger and bigger problem for the residents of the Shadow Realms as well, right? Because as these grow larger, right, they're going to get hungrier, and there are going to be fewer and fewer things that can feed it. So it's a very cool concept. After that, we have the Dauthi Horror. Now, this is specifically horrific to the Soltari, right? So Dauthi Horror is pretty straightforward. 1 black and 1 for a 2/1. It's got shadow like all Dauthi do, and it can't be blocked by white creatures. So this is specifically something that speaks to the psyche of the Soltari, and the Soltari absolutely refuse to engage with it. It's not exactly clear. Maybe it defiles them because the Soltari have a particular religious belief that they've used to kind of buffer themselves against the horror of being trapped in the Shadow Realm. After that, we have the Dauthi Marauder. This is a bigger, beefier Dauthi. So 1 black and 2 for a 3/1, obviously with shadow. The flavor text says, the Dauthi came from beneath the ruins one night, and the darkness cast them in the best possible light. And that is the Soltari Tales of Life. So they're over there, unlike the Dauthi, which are just obsessed with destruction and despair. The Soltari are focused on a more reflective life, creating poetry and other things, and here we get a nice taste of that. The Dauthi Marauder has almost like a cat warrior vibe with that crazy spiked helmet, but it's interesting how his body seems more insubstantial, but his armor actually has kind of a feel of reality to it, even though all of it is shadow. Still, pretty funky. Not an amazing card, let's be real. 3/1 for 3, not too hot, but still part of the Dauthi legacy. Then we've got the Dauthi Mercenary. 1 black and 2 for a 2/1. It is a shadow creature. Pay 1 black and 1. Dauthi Mercenary gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Now, back in the day, this was a very common concept. There were a ton of different pump nights in Magic the Gathering. So this was just the Dauthi variation. And look at that crazy horse that it rides, man. The artwork is so intense. The entire being is this pure, liquid, oily black. And it's just shiny and disgusting and terrifying. His steed is so intense with the crazy tusks and the massive teeth, and his hands have turned into claws, and he's wielding this intense shadow blade. Like, the Dauthi Mercenary feels bigger than a 2/1, I'm going to be real, but he's also a pump knight, so pumping more magic into him, that would explain it. Now, the flavor text says, the Dothi believe they dignify murder by paying for it. And it's interesting to note that we learn more from flavor text attributed to the white aligned shadow individuals than we do from the Dothi themselves. And that is a testament to the fact that the Dothi have lost their sanity. So they're not nearly as reflective as the Soltari. I like the way that that adds a bit of spice and flavor overall. Then we have the Dothi Slayer. This is the Dothi that most people are probably familiar with if they know any of the Dothi cards, because this has actually gotten a few different reprints, one of which was when they did the time-shifted cards in Time Spiral, and Dothi Slayer is pretty solid. It's 2 black for a 2/2, it's got Shadow, and each turn it attacks if able. And because, like we said, Shadow really just equals this creature can't block and this creature can't be blocked, it's a creature that's unblockable that attacks every turn. So the downside of it having to attack every turn isn't really a downside, because the Shadow ability already says, yo, I'm not going to be able to block unless they have Shadow, and who's running Shadow? Let's be real, right? And the flavor text says they have knives for every soul. That's a nice way of saying they'll be the death of all of us, right? And the artwork shows just this Dothi half lurking in the shadows. He's got his little blade, and he's out for blood. Very straightforward, but also very evocative. I love the concept of the Dothi overall. Here we have a Dothi Warlord, 1 black and 1, Shadow, and he has power equal to the number of creatures with Shadow in play. Now this one's interesting because he's so connected to the power of Shadow that he can actually draw off the power of both the Thalicos and the Soltari as well, because they are also shadow creatures, and if they're out in play, he's bigger because of them as well. So you could either view it as he gains power from drawing on their essence, or you could view it as he gains power from his allies, and he gains rage from seeing other individuals like the Thalicos and the Soltari who aren't part of the Dothi, right? And he's basically like already angry about being trapped in the shadow realm and just kind of blames these other beings that are in there. So there's a number of different ways to interpret the concept behind him. The artwork is all right, you know what I mean? He's got a big nasty looking claw, a gigantic angry head, kind of makes me think of me. Anyways, let's move on to the next card we have to talk about. The Dothi have a few creatures that aren't actually humanoid beings, and this is one of them. This is the Dothi Jackal, 1 black and 2 for a 2/1 with Shadow. So this is essentially like a jackal that was a pet of one of the Dothi originally, or just got sucked into the rift between Dominaria and Wrath and ended up turning into one of these shadow beasts, and then the Dothi made it a pet. That part isn't quite clear, right? But the idea is it's got an ability, 2 black, sacrifice Dothi Jackal, destroy target blocking creature. So interestingly enough, this can actually affect non-shadow creatures, right? Anybody who's a blocking creature. The Dothi Jackal can expend its life force in a vicious burst of violence where it like leaps through the rift between worlds and like obliterates anything. It's just the pure malice and destructive forces of it coming undone are enough to destroy any creature, but this can only be done in what is considered a slow fashion. That's how I interpret it. The fact that it can only destroy a blocking creature is like, okay, you've got a creature that's being used as a blocker, so it's engaged with the attacker. At that point, it's roughly stationary, and so then the Dothi Jackal can be used to expend its own essence and destroy that blocking creature. Pretty crazy. And the artwork shows a skeletal, intense-looking beast. I mean, you can see it's got 4 legs, but my first thoughts when I see it wouldn't be like, this is a jackal. I'd be like, what is this? And it's shown on a mound of skulls, which is, well, a mound of who knows what that has skulls on it. Pretty intense. The flavor text says, all Dothi are jackals, regardless of breed. Again, another quote attributed to the Soltari. And you can feel the bitterness in this quote, and it's understandable. Imagine you are the only sane beings left in your own miniature realm, and you can see salvation out across this border that you can never cross. And every day the other residents of the realm you're in get crazier and crazier. That would be an absolutely intense experience. Now, there is another being that is non-human, the Dothi Mind Ripper. 1 black and 3 for a 2/1, It is a shadow creature, obviously. Sacrifice it, defending player chooses and discards 3 cards. Uses ability only if Dauthi Mind Ripper is attacking and unblocked. So this is some crazy insectile beast that has mouths at both ends, and it's bound together with who knows what. It's very, very intense when you look at it. This would be horrifying. And it has the ability to just come scuttling across the battlefield, and boom, it can just invade another planeswalker's mind. Like, imagine you're somebody who has never encountered something like this. You're a planeswalker, you end up on a plane, you're in a battle with another planeswalker. He summons up this weird insect that you can see sunlight streaming through. It's half insubstantial, some weird shadowy beast, and it starts coming like skittering at you. And so you tell your minions to get in its way. You're trying to throw bears and goats and humans, whatever it is, in the way of this thing, and it just runs straight through them like they don't exist. And then when it gets to you and leaps towards you with its crazy open gaping mouth, in a puff, it's gone. But then a second later, you can feel it tearing through your mind, destroying your memories, just ripping and rending in a moment of extreme mental pain. That's so intense and so cool. So, my friends, that wraps up the history I have of the Dothi. I hope you found that interesting. I intend to do a lore video on Fantasy Geographic, going into the concept of how they got trapped there and the interplay between the 3 different shadow races. So if you're interested in that and you're not already subscribed, go ahead and head on over to my Fantasy Geographic channel. I'll leave a link up here to that. I'll leave a link down here to my other channel where I'm playing old school Magic the Gathering if you want to come and hang out for that. List of my top patrons scrolling on by. Thanks for coming by, my friends. I will see you all for the next video.